the summer of 1863, while the thunder of the Battle of Gettysburg roared 300 miles to the north, something far more sinister was taking shape in the rolling green hills of Middle Tennessee. Federal investigators would later uncover that 73 men, women, and children had vanished from a single cotton plantation in just 18 months. These were not runaway slaves, not deserters, not victims of Confederate raids, but free workers, hired hands, and even nearby families who had made the mistake of questioning how the Chamberlain family was growing wealthier as the rest of the country bled itself dry. The case was so disturbing that the official records were locked away by military order, hidden in Washington archives where they would remain buried for more than a century. What made these disappearances truly horrifying was not only the sheer number of lives lost, but the cold and methodical way in which it was done. Possessions were cataloged like merchandise bodies destroyed in chemical baths, and no trace was left behind for loved ones to grieve. Tonight we peel back the whitewashed facade of Rosewood Manor to uncover how the most powerful cotton dynasty in wartime Tennessee built its fortune on 73 unmarked graves, never meant to be found. Before we dive into the story of Ezekiel Chamberlain and his cursed empire, make sure you are subscribed, because what you are about to hear will challenge everything you thought you knew about the genteel image of Southern plantation society. And tell us in the comments where you are listening from, because our community of dark history enthusiasts always amazes us. What we found hidden in those military archives about the Chamberlains will shake you to your core. Rosewood Manor stood like a shining beacon of Southern wealth in Rutherford County, Tennessee, just 20 miles southeast of Nashville. Built in 1834 by Ezekiel Chamberlain's father, the estate had survived financial storms that wiped out countless other plantations. By 1863, while the rest of the region suffered under labor shortages and Union blockades, Rosewood was producing more cotton than in its richest antebellum years. The three-story Greek Revival mansion, with its 6 towering Corinthian columns and wraparound double galleries, surveyed nearly 2,000 acres of fertile black soil. Inside the house was a masterpiece boasting Italian marble fireplaces carved by hand crystal chandeliers from France and mahogany paneling aged for 7 years before installation. Ezekiel Chamberlain had inherited far more than land from his father Josiah. At 42, he possessed the sharp instincts of a born businessman and the ruthless resolve that had made the Chamberlain name a symbol of power throughout the Cumberland Valley. Standing 6 feet tall with piercing gray eyes and prematurely silver hair, Ezekiel carried himself with the poise of an aristocrat. But those close to him knew there was something colder beneath the polished veneer. His hands, soft from privilege, bore calluses that came not from work, but from activities no neighbor would dare imagine. Unlike many plantation owners who fled when Union troops closed in on Nashville in 1862, Ezekiel stayed behind, claiming neutrality while secretly cutting deals with both sides. His scheme was bold and brilliant. He sold cotton to the Confederates at inflated prices, then turned around and sold the same cotton to the Union whenever their forces intercepted Confederate supply trains, getting paid twice for the same bales. And that was only the beginning. His wife, Margaret, a formidable woman from an old Virginia tobacco family, ran the household with a discipline that bordered on military precision. At 38, she had been a celebrated beauty in her youth. But time had chiseled her features into something that inspired fear rather than admiration. Her ledgers recorded everything from the weekly use of flour to the exact number of candles burned in each room, each entry written in her perfect copperplate script, an art of control that mirrored the dark order at the heart of Rosewood. There was a calculating glint in Ezekiel's gaze, a constant measuring of how every word he spoke was being received. And there was something else, something far stranger, a smell that clung to the outbuildings of Rosewood Manor, chemical and biting out of place amid the hay animals and damp earth of a working plantation. It reminded Sheriff Briggs of the tannery on the edge of town, but stronger, sharper, almost nauseating. "I hope you understand, Sheriff, that I cannot allow theft and drunkenness to go unpunished," Ezekiel said as he closed the ledger with a crisp, final snap. "Discipline is the backbone of order, especially in these unsettled times." Thomas Henley was given every opportunity to change his ways, and he chose to waste that chance. Briggs nodded, slipping the documents into his coat, but as he rode away from Rosewood Manor, an unease settled in his gut that he could not shake. Everything about Ezekiel's account had been too perfect. The witnesses too willing, the paperwork too neat. And in 15 years, wearing a badge, Briggs had learned that instincts this strong were never wrong. Something at Rosewood was being hidden. 3 days later, Martha Henley's body was found drifting in Stones River, her lifeless form carried by a current swollen from recent rains. Her horse grazed unharmed on the bank. No wounds marked her, and the coroner declared it a simple drowning, an accident brought on by the river's treacherous swell. But Briggs noticed what no one else seemed to care about, that her reticule was missing along with the daguerreotype of her brother that she always carried close to her heart. The long winter of 1862 into 1863 passed in an eerie quiet around Rosewood Manor. But beyond its pristine fields, the surrounding communities whispered of family after family who had vanished. James Patterson, a skilled carpenter from Shelbyville, had taken work at Rosewood in December and soon after disappeared. In January, his wife Sarah received one carefully written letter assuring her he was fine and would return as soon as his contract ended. After that, there was nothing. When she finally braved the journey to Rosewood Manor in March, she was told coldly that James had abandoned his position, leaving behind all of his tools and belongings. In January, a young Irish woman named Elena Walsh, desperate to escape poverty in Nashville, had been hired as a seamstress. Her landlady recalled how she left with a single carpet bag and a smile, promising to be back for her few possessions once she had settled in at what she described as a grand plantation where the workers were treated like family. She never returned, and no word ever came. The most chilling of all was the Freeman family, Isaac, his wife Ruth, and their sons Jacob and Benjamin. Tempted by the promise of good wages for Isaac's skill as a cotton gin mechanic, they sold their small farm, packed their wagon, and set out in February for what they thought would be a better life. All four were hired Ruth as a cook and the boys as laborers, but none of them were ever seen again. Each time Briggs tried to find answers, he ran headfirst into the same flawless story, the same pattern, the same wall. Ezekiel Chamberlain produced immaculate records of theft, drunkenness, violence, or abandonment. The papers were flawless, the accounts seamless, the witnesses unshakable. And every time, without exception, there was no trace of the missing. It was as if they had been swallowed whole by the earth, leaving behind only Ezekiel's tidy explanations. But Josiah Creek, the massive head overseer of Rosewood Manor, a man with arms like tree trunks and a face leathered by 40 years in the fields, had begun to harbor doubts about the family he had served since Ezekiel's father bought the estate in 1834. He had witnessed the brutalities of the slave system and had carried out his share of punishments without flinching, but what he saw in 1863 was different, cold, and calculated in a way that disturbed even a man hardened by decades of cruelty. The first signs appeared in March, when he noticed the plantation's food stores lasting far longer than they should have with the number of workers on record. According to Daniel Chamberlain's official ledgers, there were 67 laborers, yet Creek's own quiet count never reached more than 39. The missing 28 gnawed at him until a pattern began to emerge. In the dead of night, long after midnight, He saw Daniel and Samuel Chamberlain slipping through the workers' quarters, carrying lanterns flanked by two pale, gaunt strangers he had never seen before. These men dressed like laborers, but their soft hands and manner spoke of education rather than toil, and the leather satchels they carried clinked faintly as if filled with surgical instruments. Each of these visits was followed by another disappearance. Cabins that had been full the day before would be found scrubbed spotless, all belongings gone as if no one had ever lived there. On a humid April night, Creek finally gave in to his growing dread and followed them, staying to the shadows as the brothers entered the cabin of Benjamin Carver, a free black man from Memphis who had only been there 3 weeks but was already asking too many questions about the workers who kept vanishing. 20 minutes later, the brothers emerged carrying a heavy canvas sack between them, the bulges and shifting weight inside leaving little doubt as to what it contained, and in the moonlight, Creek saw dark stains spreading across the fabric. Samuel was panting with effort, and Daniel kept glancing back as they trudged up toward the old cemetery, past the marble headstones of 3 Chamberlain generations, and into the woods beyond, where a faint torchlight flickered. Hidden behind an ancient oak creek, watched as the brothers were joined by their father Ezekiel and the 2 pale strangers. Together they lowered the sack into a pre-dug pit, and one of the pale men uncorked a glass bottle and poured a clear liquid over it. The air filled with a harsh, acrid stench, the same smell that had haunted Sheriff Briggs, the smell of quicklime. Ezekiel's low voice carried just enough for Creek to hear 73 souls to build an empire, each one a brick in the foundation of our dynasty. What we do here tonight will ensure our family prospers long after this war is forgotten. When the pit was covered and carefully disguised with leaves and branches, the group split apart Ezekiel, walking back toward the mansion, while his sons and the strangers disappeared toward a large barn at the edge of the property. Curiosity laced with horror drove Creek to creep up to the barn and peer through a crack in the boards. What he saw inside froze his blood. The building had been transformed into a grotesque factory, a place built not for farming, but for the methodical destruction of human remains. Along one wall stood enormous wooden vats filled with the same quicklime, their surfaces crusted white with wooden paddles for stirring and iron grates to catch what the liquid could not dissolve. Personal effects salvaged from the slurry were laid out in neat rows on long tables. Thomas Henley's leather tool belt, Elena Walsh's delicate silver locket, and a small wooden box containing the Freeman family's wedding rings. A furnace glowed in the corner, its fire melting gold and silver into blank ingots, stripping away their past. But the most chilling thing was a row of ledgers on a desk, and in Daniel's elegant handwriting. Creek saw that they did not record cotton or livestock, but the careful accounting of human lives converted into profit margins. Each entry in the ledger listed a name, the date of arrival, the date of death, and a detailed inventory of possessions with their assessed value. Thomas Henley, November 15th, 1862. Tools and silver watch 47. James Patterson, December 22nd, 1862. Carpenter tools and gold ring 89. Elena Walsh, January 18th, 1863. Sewing supplies and silver locket 23. Freeman family. February 8th, 1863, wagon tools, household goods, personal effects, 156. Page after page, every line was a death sentence disguised as neat record-keeping each victim. Someone who had come to Rosewood Manor hoping for honest work and instead met only death. The combined value of the goods, recovered from 73 victims, totaled more than $4,000, enough to explain the Chamberlains' unshakable prosperity during the lean war years when other plantations struggled to survive. But to Creek, the truth was obvious. This was not about financial survival. These were not desperate people turned criminals by wartime hunger. They were deliberate predators who had perfected a system for profiting from human lives. Rosewood was not a farm at all. It was a trap, baited with promises of safety and wages. As Creek stood in the barn, staring at the horror documented in Daniel's meticulous hand, he realized this killing had not begun recently. The earliest entries dated back to 1861, showing that for nearly 2 years the family had refined their methods with each victim until their system left no trace. The pale strangers finally had names in the ledger: Dr. Cornelius Polk and his brother Edgar, former Confederate medical officers who had deserted after the slaughter at Shiloh. Cornelius had once been a practicing physician in Kentucky, while Edgar had studied chemistry at Transylvania University, and it was their knowledge that had turned the Chamberlain enterprise into a machine of efficient death. They administered chloroform and morphine in precise doses, leaving no wounds, no signs of struggle, nothing for a coroner to find. Creek's horror deepened as he realized that the family's reach went far beyond the plantation gates. They placed advertisements in Tennessee and Kentucky newspapers, offering generous wages and ideal working conditions. They sought out people on the margins: widows, immigrants, freed slaves with no kin, and skilled men whose livelihoods had been destroyed by war. People whose disappearance would not draw immediate suspicion. They even used unscrupulous boarding house keepers and crooked labor brokers who, in return for a small fee, sent the Chamberlains exactly the kind of workers they desired, complete with details about their skills and any valuables they might carry. Every line of the ledger was proof that Rosewood Manor was a human slaughterhouse disguised as a plantation, a carefully constructed facade where people were stripped of everything: possessions, names, even their bones, and then erased from the world. As Creek stumbled back from the gap in the boards, sickened to the core by the enormity of what he had found. His boots snagged on a loose plank, the crack of wood echoing in the night like a gunshot. Inside the barn, all sound ceased. Then came the slow, deliberate footsteps moving toward the door. "Who's out there?" Daniel Chamberlain's voice cut through the darkness like a blade. "Samuel, check the perimeter. Take the dogs and make sure whoever it is doesn't get away." Creek ran crashing through the underbrush as the savage barking of hounds erupted behind him, and Samuel Chamberlain's voice roared through the darkness, urging the animals to track the intruder who now carried the weight of their family's secret. His only advantage was nearly 30 years of knowing every fence line, hidden path, and hollow in the land. But he also knew that the Chamberlains would never stop until he was found. And when that moment came, his name would be entered as victim number 74 in Daniel's cursed ledger. Just when we thought we had seen it all, the horror in Rutherford County was only beginning. If this story chills you, share it with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit like to help us, and subscribe so you never miss stories like this. Creek's discovery had torn away the veil on the Chamberlain family's true business. But now his desperate flight through the Tennessee night was cut short when he stumbled over a fallen log and tumbled into a shallow ravine, his leg twisting beneath him with a sickening snap that echoed into the trees. Breathless and half-blinded by pain, he could already hear the baying of the hounds closing in the hunting dogs, having locked onto his scent with merciless precision, and over their snarling came the voices of men. Samuel Chamberlain's deep command carried through the still air, sharp orders to drive the dogs forward, answered by the shriller calls of the Polk brothers, coordinating the search. "He can't have gone far," Samuel barked. "The dogs have his trail, and there's nowhere for him to hide when we catch him. It will look like an accident, maybe a fall from his horse while checking the fences. And what if he's already told someone what he saw?" Edgar Polk's nervous tenor betrayed his growing panic. "Then we expand the cleanup operation," came Ezekiel Chamberlain's measured voice as he joined them. but I doubt Creek has had time to tell anyone anything. He's a simple man who keeps to himself, and even if he vanishes, there will be no investigation that threatens us. Pressing himself deeper into the wet mud of the creek bed, Creek clenched his teeth against the stabbing agony in his leg as he listened to these men plan his murder with the same calm precision they had used to erase 73 innocent lives. In that moment, he understood he had uncovered something far darker than greed and organized slaughterhouse that saw human beings as a crop to be harvested. And then fate intervened. Corporal William Hayes, a Union cavalry scout who had been shadowing Rosewood Manor for 3 days on reconnaissance orders from Major General William Rose, had been documenting Confederate supply activity in the area when the barking of hounds, the shouting voices, and the frenzied search through the forest drew him in. He had already noted the strange patterns on the plantation, the constant arrival of new workers, the lantern-lit movements at all hours, the chemical reek from the outbuildings, and though his orders were to observe not interfere, the urgency and violence of what he was hearing pulled him closer. It was Hayes who found Creek broken and gasping at the bottom of the ravine. His clothes torn, his leg bent at an unnatural angle. At first he thought he had found a runaway slave, but the desperate words pouring from Creek's mouth soon told a different story. "They're killing folks for their belongings," Creek rasped, clutching Hayes's jacket with shaking hands. 73 people dead and buried in unmarked graves all through these woods. You've got to stop them before they kill again. They've got chemicals to melt the bodies, and books that keep track of it all, like it's a business. Hayes hoisted Creek onto his horse, and as the sounds of the hounds closed in, turned toward Nashville at a gallop. Creek, barely conscious from the pain of his shattered leg, provided federal authorities with precise directions to the plantation. His voice hoarse but unwavering as he described the barn, the vats, and the shallow graves scattered across the Rosewood woods. At first, Union officers dismissed him as a bitter overseer or Confederate sympathizer, seeking to smear a prominent Loyalist family. But his uncanny knowledge of the layout, his detailed account of the barn's contents, and his ability to name the exact locations of dozens of graves gradually forced Major General William Rose to authorize a full-scale investigation. The general had heard rumors of strange disappearances linked to Tennessee plantations, but nothing remotely approaching the scale Creek described. And if even a fraction of his claims were true, then Rosewood Manor was nothing less than a privately run concentration camp where innocent civilians were murdered for profit, a war crime that transcended allegiances. On May 15, 1863, a company of Union infantry encircled the estate as Creek, pale with pain but grim with purpose, led investigators to the barn. What they found there exceeded the worst of his descriptions. The quicklime vats, the sordid personal effects, and most damning of all, maps of the woods, marked with the locations of 73 numbered graves, each grave linked in Daniel Chamberlain's ledgers to a detailed entry cataloging the victim's name, age, occupation, possessions, family ties, and skills. The ledgers revealed a steady evolution of methods, the earliest entries describing clumsy poisonings and staged accidents, while the later records demonstrated a clinical precision in which drugs left no visible marks and the disposal of remains left no evidence. Most chilling of all was a set of papers written in Ezekiel Chamberlain's own hand. A business plan calculating how the chaos of Reconstruction would provide a steady stream of displaced freedmen, immigrants, and ruined farmers, easy prey for a new phase of their murderous enterprise. When the troops moved to make arrests, they found the house abandoned, the family having slipped away into the night, apparently warned by spies in town. They left behind their cotton, their livestock, their machinery, and an overwhelming mountain of evidence, but no sign of themselves. Within days, the bodies of the Polk brothers were found floating in the Cumberland River, throats slit, silenced by the very family they had served a final act to erase potential witnesses. It took nearly 3 weeks and the assistance of railroad engineers to exhume the 73 graves, the quicklime having reduced most of the remains to fragments of bone and scraps of clothing. But those fragments were enough to confirm Creek's story and provide families with the only closure they would ever receive. The investigation exposed a network that stretched from Nashville to Memphis, Louisville to St. Louis, involving boarding house owners, labor agents, and newspaper editors who fed the Chamberlains a steady supply of isolated, desperate souls. Federal authorities issued wanted posters across the South, and even in Canada, offering rich rewards for their capture. But the family vanished as completely as their victims. Rumors swirled for decades. Some claimed the Chamberlains had fled to Mexico or South America. Others swore they had been seen boarding a ship in Mobile under forged British passports. And a few whispered that Confederate or Union soldiers had hunted them down in secret. No proof ever surfaced, and the ultimate fate of Ezekiel Chamberlain and his cursed family remains one of the most enduring mysteries of the Civil War. Their stolen wealth allowed them to vanish and begin again in anonymity, while Rosewood Manor itself was seized by federal authorities and turned into a Union hospital. A bitter irony that a house built on blood and greed would end its days as a place of healing. The cotton fields that had hidden so much horror were divided among freed slaves and destitute refugees who carved out small farms from the cursed land and tried to wash away its legacy. After the war, the mansion with its proud white columns and sweeping galleries stood empty for nearly 20 years, avoided by locals who whispered it was haunted by the souls of the murdered. Every attempt to restore it ended in failure. Workmen driven away by strange noises, shadowed corners, inexplicable accidents, and an oppressive dread that seemed to seep from the walls. In 1884, the Louisville and Nashville Railroad finally bought the property, tearing the mansion down and replacing it with a rail yard and switching station, erasing the last physical trace of the Chamberlain dynasty. Today, nothing remains but a small marker placed a century later in 1963 on a busy Murfreesboro street, its inscription spare and unadorned in memory of the victims of Rosewood Manor. Their names are known to God. Most passers-by give it no thought, unaware of the terror it represents, though historians still tell the tale of the cotton fortune built on unmarked graves. Josiah Creek, the overseer whose courage brought the truth to light, survived the war and spent his remaining years working with federal authorities to locate the families of the dead, his limp a constant reminder of the night he uncovered how wealth can turn men into monsters. His testimony before the military tribunal shaped some of the first legal precedents for prosecuting war crimes. And though the Chamberlains themselves escaped justice, he helped expose their network and bring many of their accomplices to trial, even if lenient sentences were given in exchange for cooperation. Yet the horrors he witnessed left deep scars. He never married, never had children, and rarely spoke of that night, except when called to the witness stand. Those who knew him said he carried an invisible burden, a man who had seen too much evil to ever believe fully in human goodness again. In 1889, 26 years after the graves were unearthed, Creek was found dead in his small cabin near the ruins of Rosewood Manor, and with his death came one final revelation. A sealed statement he had left to the Tennessee State Historical Society, opened only after his passing, revealed that the 73 bodies were only part of the truth. In careful handwriting, he confessed that he believed the true number was closer to 100. Including drifters, escaped slaves, and other souls who would never be missed, erased so completely that only faint whispers of their existence remained. He admitted he had suspected the truth for months before he finally saw it with his own eyes. his fear of the Chamberlain family's power keeping him silent until the evidence became impossible to ignore. Most chilling of all, his testament suggested that Rosewood was not alone. There were rumors never confirmed of other plantations that had used the chaos of war to create similar engines of death, their own ledgers hidden their graves, still unmarked. The case of Rosewood Manor stands as one of the darkest stains in American history. A warning that the most terrible atrocities are not always committed by madmen or zealots, but by cold, methodical people who reduce life to numbers in a ledger and, in the fog of war, built a private kingdom of terror where those who came seeking honest work found only death, their lives extinguished in the name of profit. These were never crimes of passion or acts of wartime desperation, but cold, deliberate business decisions carried out by people who looked at other human beings and saw nothing but inventory and profit. Every ledger entry, every quicklime pit, every carefully chosen victim spoke to a level of premeditation that defies belief. Modern criminologists who have studied the Chamberlain case describe the family as a textbook example of organized serial killers operating as a unit. Ezekiel, the mastermind, a charismatic patriarch who convinced those closest to him that slaughter was necessary to preserve their wealth and station. Margaret, the iron-willed matriarch who turned the logistics of murder into a domestic routine. Daniel, the precise accountant who transformed human lives into numbers in a ledger. And Samuel, the brutal enforcer who carried out the physical acts without hesitation. The presence of the Polk brothers added an even darker edge, showing how professional medical skill could be warped into an instrument of death, how the chaos of war gave men the chance to discard their pasts and build new lives out of evil. The most chilling fact of all is that without Josiah Creek's chance discovery, the system they built could have continued for years, killing hundreds more under the cover of respectability. That the Chamberlains almost escaped justice, entirely vanishing into the fog of history with their stolen fortune proves how elusive such predators can be. Yet from their crimes came lessons that shaped the future. The case created precedents for prosecuting organized mass murder and laid the groundwork for understanding how legitimate business structures can be twisted into machines for evil. It also remains a brutal reminder that the people who fall victim to such schemes are rarely the powerful. They are ordinary, desperate souls searching for survival, betrayed by their willingness to trust. In the years after the war, as a broken country tried to heal the horror of Rosewood Manor, stood as a grim testament that some of the worst atrocities were committed far from the battlefield by those who hid behind fine manners and the illusion of civility. Evil does not always snarl. Sometimes it wears a pressed suit, sits at a polished table, and calls murder commerce. That is why this story endures a warning that the price of civilization is eternal vigilance against those who would prey on the desperate for their own gain. So what do you think? Did the Chamberlains' disappearance spare them justice they should have faced in court? Or did fate catch up to them in some unmarked grave far from Tennessee? And do you believe there were other hidden operations like this still buried in the shadows of the Civil War? Let us know in the comments below. If this story chilled you, share it with someone who loves dark mysteries. Subscribe and hit that bell for more. And remember, the most terrifying monsters are often the ones who look exactly like ordinary people. Thank you all very much for watching my video until the end. I sincerely appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.